Hi, this is case 7 um, of the data breach at OPM. My name is Stacy and my partners are Samer, Ketan, and Corey. So what is OPM? OPM is the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. It's basically an independent agency of the U.S. government that helps hiring new employees, conducting background checks, and managing pensions benefits for retired federal employees at their families and their families. So basically, the agency maintains data on millions of federal government employees, retirees, contractors, and prospective employees. So the agency in charge of protecting all of those millions of employee data was also involved in the data breach back in 2015. So the first data breach was sometime early in 2015, and it was discovered that the personal data, which included the full name, the birth date, home addresses, and social security numbers of 4.2 million of their former federal government employees had been stolen. And later that same year in June, it was announced that the background investigation records of 21.5 million of current and prospective federal employees was also involved in the second data breach. So after the second data breach, the OPM's Chief Information Officer, Donna Samer, acknowledged that the information compromised in the data breach included the SF-86 data, as well as clearance education information. So basically, in the breach, about the actual fingerprint data for more than 5.6 million people was taken, and this concerned security experts, and some of the concerns included the Central Intelligence Agency, which basically the CIA conducts its own background checks. It doesn't need the OPM's help, but because of that, employee data who was not stolen at the breach could be identified as agents of the CIA. Also security clearances, so people that didn't have clearance before, the perpetrators of the data could have given those security clearances to other people who might not be recruited in advance. And also the next one is naturalized US agents, which means that the personal information data of big agents or officials could be exploited, and they could be targeted. Um, After this, the breaches were announced in the Department of Defense, and they awarded 133 million contract in identity theft, and they also did a 10-year credit monitoring. So basically, protection of 21.5 individuals of personal data information was stolen. But out of all of this, not all of the people were offered identity theft information, because it was larger that about 78 million to 276 million people were identifiable and compromised. So not everyone was covered in that protection. Next in the presentation, I'm gonna pass it to my partner, Samer.
Hello, this is Samer. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into the breaches and cover the lawsuit and the settlement. So as we saw in the previous slides and got a little bit more information about the two breaches, we will be covering some information about the OPM and the lawsuit that followed those breaches. So as we mentioned above, during the hearing of the committee shortly after the breaches, it was discovered that among the information compromised were some forms of the SF-86 with data and information for personnel. For those not familiar with the SF-86 forms, it is one of the highest security screenings for government officials and federal employees. Now, the form itself consists of 34 sections and about 127 pages long that cover different aspects of someone's life. Due to the importance of this form, one can only access it through an invitation from potential employer, of course, due to the sensitivity of information provided. Now, federal employees usually go through 3 different types of security clearances depending on their position. First of all is the non-sensitive positions. Secondly, it would be the public trust positions. And finally is, and the highest of them all, is the national security positions. The data compromised in the two breaches mentioned above have thought to cover all three levels of security clearances. The lawsuit in 2015, held by the country's largest government employees union, known as the AFGE, as the defendant in a Class A lawsuit against the OPM executives and their contractors, seeking restitution due to the belief that the OPM violated the Privacy Act and due to negligence law. AFG's lawsuit is primarily based on what is known as fear of prospective loss. In other words, the Class A lawsuit requested restitution for harm that has not yet been done, um, which basically holds a chance of being done down the road. Thus, in legal proceedings, in order to hold a strong ground in courtrooms with such claims, it is better off to have every case evaluated individually for the extent of harm that could be potentially done. Now, due to the amount of people affected in that breach, it was nearly impossible to do so because it would take almost 2 decades to cover 200 million individual cases. Now, aside from not the so good standing in the courtroom against the OPM, the AFGE was wishful with supporting its evidence based on some findings of a report from the U.S. House of Representatives Committee Oversight and Government Reforms, indicating that OPM did not follow cybersecurity recommendations that were previously given to it. Finally, the case was settled with OPM signing $133 million contract to cover 21.5 million people directly affected by the breaches and providing them with identity theft protection for the time of 10 years. A quick update, which is what is happening in the now regarding those breaches. A quick update for the situation going on with OPM at the moment. It was found that up to recent years, and that's up to 2018-19, multiple individual lawsuits have surfaced from defendants that believe the restitution was not sufficient or did not cover them. It is worth to mention, though, that some major changes have taken place at OPM after the breach, and that they have significantly improved the way they handle information by enhancing their cybersecurity and actually scoring an A on the FITARA scoreboard. I'll pass it over to Ketan to cover some ethical questions.
Hi, I'm Ketan. Our first ethical dilemma was discussing whether OPM was right in only providing services to the 21.5 million people that were employed by the government and not their immediate family. We didn't believe so because there were possibly 74 to 200 million people that could have been affected by the data leak, and providing this kind of service to less than a fourth of the people affected or the potential victims is practically doing the bare minimum that is expected of the company. Our second ethical dilemma was whether or not OPM was ethical in collecting and storing that much data on their employees even after hiring them. We believe that in collecting the data itself, yes, it was ethical to ensure the safety of other government officials and state secrets. However, in doing so and storing that amount of data in a place that was completely unprotected was completely unethical and put not only the employees at risk, but their families. Collecting the data initially is, a security risk, but storing it without actually providing the necessary security for it was a complete oversight. Our third ethical dilemma was obviously was OPM negligent in their handling of cybersecurity and prevention of leaks, and that's an absolute certainty that they were. Reports were filed stating that OPM had gotten advice in terms of cybersecurity issues, and it was shown, and through their actions, shown that they completely ignored those warnings because it happened not only once, but twice within the same year. The data breach was so preventable that it's almost comical, and there was readily available programs and systems that would and could have prevented the incident from happening altogether. And to not implement these systems, especially immediately after the first breach, was a complete oversight on their part. And so now I'll pass it to Corey for the critical thinking questions.
Hello, my name is Corey Black, and I'm with you today to discuss the Office of Personnel Management's data breach and some critical thinking questions regarding it. The first question that we come across is, do you feel there should be some sort of redress for the 21 million people whose personal information was stolen, even if they cannot prove actual monetary damages? And my response to this question is yes, I do believe there should be some sort of redress for the 21 million people whose personal information was stolen. And I also kind of disagree with the premise of the question. I think they can prove monetary damages. And if you look at what was stolen, they had personal data stolen. And according to the World Economic Forum, personal data of Americans can be sold for up to $100 per person per day. That is pretty substantial for the average person, I would assume. And so if you think about it, having that stolen from you, even if you weren't using it, I would argue that is monetary damages. And then additionally, with the risk of identity theft and possibly having to pay for personal identity theft protection from a third-party service, that is real monetary damages that have resulted from the actions of the negligence of the Office of Personnel Management. The second critical thinking question that we are going to answer today is, how might foreign powers and or terrorists use the stolen data to mount intelligence operations against the United States? An important thing that could happen due to the data breach is that people would be given national security clearance. You could mess with the data and mess with the systems of OPM to give people who should not have it national security clearance, including foreign actors. That could obviously be bad for us if they were able to get access to classified information based on that security. And the third thing that could be bad for the United States nationally is sensitive information from agents working abroad, like relatives, personal information, possible things they don't want to get out about their sex life, maybe, or just embarrassing things in the past that have happened. They could be that. Information can be used to get leverage on our agents overseas, and that could neutralize them and make them not able to complete their mission successfully. So these are very, very bad things that could happen. What are the steps that OPM has taken to improve its cybersecurity? Are you satisfied with the actions? And if not, what additional changes would you suggest? All right, and if I would go to the next slide, this is what OPM effectively did after they got their stuff together. They implemented multi-factor authentication, they modernized their information technology infrastructure, they appointed a new cybersecurity advisor, and they formed the National Background Investigations Bureau. Now, I believe for OPM, these were all good steps. Multi-factor authentication is a very strong tool in cybersecurity. Using a third-party authenticator and not using your phone number, because that's actually very less secure. Using a third-party authenticator to get 30-second generated codes to be able to confirm your identity and that you're the actual person and not someone who has stolen your identity to access your account. That is very helpful in deterring cyber terrorism. Modernizing information technology infrastructure, this one is honestly a given. Everywhere needs to do this because the technology is ramping up faster every day, every year. So if you don't do this, you're left behind. Appointed a new cybersecurity advisor. I'd say this one is the one that they should have went harder on. They just one cybersecurity advisor after 21 million people were breached. And in the second data breach of the department in only a number of years, yes, that is a little bit low. They should have went higher on that. And forming the National Background Investigations Bureau, this one doesn't really seem related to the data breach. More of just like taking it out of their responsibility and into someone else. But that's what OPM did, and that was good enough for them. But for the entire U.S. federal government, I believe that there needs to be a severe, strong response to all of the data breaches that have been going on, not just OPM's. And specifically, the most concerning one is the SolarWinds data breach at the end of 2020. That one was massive, like bigger than basically any data breach in the history of data breaches. And that affected many parts of the United States government as well as top companies. Anyway, to counter the obvious growing threat of cyber terrorism and cybersecurity issues, the United States needs to create an entirely new branch of the armed services. I would call this branch the Cyber Force. And this branch needs to be able to defend the United States' national interests in the new coming age of warfare, which is mostly between world powers, conducted over espionage and online in cyber warfare and cybercrime. And to not have an armed services division or branch dedicated to just that is severely lacking in the current climate, the current global climate. So those were the critical questions, and that's all I have for you today. So thank you. I've been Corey Black, and we are group number 7.